can do it. Welcome everybody to What Impact Does Trust-Based Philanthropy Facilitate? So excited to have you all here with us today for this program and peer discussion. This will be an interactive program, so I know you all are coming with a lot of questions and insights, and hopefully you'll get a chance to learn more from each other and from our slated program. I'm Shantia Ford, the Director of Programs and Strategic Learning at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. I am seated on Lene Lenape native land for my native land acknowledgement. And for a visual descriptor, I am a Black woman with shoulder length braids and my red lip sitting in front of a white wall with some diplomas and artwork on it. And so excited to have you all here with us today for this program. And thank you for those of you that are sharing what's made you happy and introducing yourself in the chat. We're so excited to see you all and get to know a little bit more about you, and hopefully we'll get to engage more in this program. So to jump right in with a little bit of housekeeping, as I mentioned, engagement is encouraged. We know there are a lot of questions around impact, and this is something that has come up for us quite a bit. So this is just the start to, or I don't even want to say the start because we've been talking about it, but this is meant to be a jump off pad for some of these discussions around what impact looks like in a trust-based lens, how to really do this work. And so we encourage you to jump in, to lean in, to ask your questions, to engage, and we're already seeing some of that in action. We ask that you, of course, keep your microphones muted unless you're, speaking, unless you have the floor. We encourage you to use the chat box for questions, comments, and dialogue. If you want to ask something anonymously, you can feel free to message the TBP staff, myself, my colleague Danielle or Shadi. We're happy to lift things up to the larger group. Of course, ensure that you're using the most recent version of Zoom for all of its different capabilities. For accessibility needs, you can utilize the CART transcription if you need any support with that or any other accessibility needs. My colleague Danielle can support you there. She just put that information in the chat for you. And the session will be recorded, but we will be determining whether we're publicizing it afterwards or not. So that's to be determined. So feel free to share as openly as you need to. So to jump right into our agenda, of course, we'll spend some time on this opening. We'll do a little bit of context setting for where we are. We have two amazing speakers that are going to be sharing some reflections, and then we're going to have the bulk of our time to be open discussion where you'll get to answer some questions, ask some questions, and just engage in conversation. So some of the objectives we have for today, there are so many, so many different things we could really focus on when it comes to impact and evaluation. But we really want to spend some time clarifying TBP's stance on impact. And we acknowledge this is something that is evolving. And so we're learning collectively, but we do have a stance on impact. And so we want to be able to share that and to clarify it for those of you that are on your trust-based philanthropy journey. And we want to give practitioners the opportunity to explore the ways that they can shift conventional practices to better align with with the trust-based approach. We also want to motivate story sharing among funders about the categories of outcomes that you all are seeing and experiencing as a result of trust-based philanthropy. And we want to reinforce this importance of the outcomes that are rarely acknowledged as key variables in social change, especially outcomes related to nonprofit health and well-being. So we'll spend a good amount of time lifting that up, lifting up these other variables that oftentimes go underlooked or under prioritized when it comes to impact conversations. And then, of course, we want to inspire new ideas about how to assess impact without overburdening nonprofits. So these are just some of the objectives that we're really prioritizing today. So we will go ahead and jump in, and we want to situate ourselves with some grounding around how the field conventionally looks at impact and how things have been evolving in our sector. And we will acknowledge, I know we have some evaluators in the room, we have some folks that are really seeped into this work. And so we encourage you to also share your insights and your thinking and your expertise, as we know you are squarely situated in this wheelhouse. Um, but it's important to really think about how philanthropy has been conventionally operating, to think about what a trust-based shift could look like and what that gap could look like. So these are just some of the different norms that we've seen and heard when it comes to impact. So some of the characteristics that we see are characteristics around being possessive. So maybe a funder is saying, as the funder, this is my impact. I define and I own it. That's one of the things we've seen and heard. Maybe it's more extractive. As a funder, I desire these specific things, this specific impact, and you should do what I desire regardless of your capacity or your alignment. Um, so sometimes that looks like a really extractive interaction between funders and nonprofits, where funders are really just taking from nonprofits, regardless of their capacity, or their strategic alignment. Indebted is another characteristic that we see when it comes to conventional philanthropy. As the funder, you're beholden to me and to my expectations. You owe me, as the person who's giving away the money, as the entity that's giving away the money, you owe me these things in in exchange for the funds. And then onerous. As a funder, there are various things I need to prove. Um, there are various things that I need to prove that this is not a waste, and that you must commit to providing them as a requirement for these funds. So that can be really onerous on nonprofits, on grantee partners. And then presumptive. As a funder, I'm assuming this is what success means, and you should follow my metrics, you should follow my guidelines. So these are just some of the different conventional norms and orientations. I definitely want to shout out a wonderful partner. If you're not keyed in, the Equitable Evaluation Initiative has a framework that really talks about orthodoxies. It includes a set of orthodoxies that highlight this thinking. And my colleague would drop that into the chat for you to really dig into, because you can see some of these orientations in action that we constantly are operating in these ways, and it can be very harmful for our partners, for our nonprofit partners. Thank you, Danielle. And I want to pass it over to my colleague Shadi. We're going to tag team this orientation section before we jump into the discussion. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Shadi to talk about some of this.
Thank you, Shantias, and good day, everyone. It's so great to be with you. My name is Shadi Salehi. I am the Executive Director of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. I am joining you from the ancestral lands of the Ohlone people, also known as San Francisco, California. I am an Iranian woman with pale olive skin, long brown hair, wearing a brown mock turtleneck, and I have a blurred background. I'm in my home office here with a blurred background, and it's wonderful to be with you all. So as Shantias has shared, and as all of you know, since you're here, this question around trust-based philanthropy and impact is a very hot topic right now. While we're not going to actually offer a breakdown of the trust-based philanthropy framework in depth today, I do want to kind of acknowledge that maybe some of you might be a little bit newer to trust-based philanthropy. And part of the misperceptions that do crop up around trust-based philanthropy and impact have to do with the fact that many associate trust-based philanthropy solely with unrestricted funding and streamlined paperwork. And that creates a lot of misperceptions in general about trust-based philanthropy's interest in impact. It creates this, it has perpetuated misinformation that trust-based philanthropy is about no strings giving. But in reality, it's a deeply relational approach that relies on trust building and rigorous relationship building in order to foster a deeper sense of learning so that funders can be more strategic in how they're thinking about their work, and so that nonprofits can have the resources and supports to do that work. So some of the misperceptions are that trust-based philanthropy is not concerned with impact at all, that it's just kind of loose and willy-nilly giving. It's been perpetuated wrongly that trust-based philanthropy is at odds with strategic evaluation or strategic philanthropy. There's, a misperception that you can't prove any results or guarantee results with trust-based philanthropy, or that it's not allowed to ask questions or collect information about your giving when you're doing trust-based philanthropy. These are all misperceptions. The reality is that trust-based philanthropy is geared toward achieving results. It takes a deeply relational approach that understands that change happens in a greater ecosystem, and that the relationship of the funder is to support and amplify and learn alongside those who are doing the work with a sense of accountability to the communities that are being served. So we see, the realities are that it does contribute to greater impact because it's deeply informed by those who are doing the work and those who are closest to the issues at hand. It's a highly strategic approach that requires a rigor in self-evaluation and relationship building and ongoing learning and iteration. And it produces a range of outcomes that are actual essential ingredients to advancing social change, but often are under-recognized or unrecognized as key ingredients, especially when it comes to the health and stability of nonprofits. So we'll be breaking all of this down, but this is really just kind of like a flyover of the misperceptions and the realities when it comes to trust-based philanthropy and impact. Back to you, Shantias.
Thanks, Shadi. So yeah, when it comes to impact and evaluation, there are various schools of thoughts, there are definitions, there are frameworks for how folks are really thinking about this whole scope of work. And we just wanted to break down some of the tenets for trust-based philanthropies, impact orientation, what our orientation looks like. And so we'll start with the defining impact, what that looks like. And so trust-based funders are doing this deep, power-conscious exploration of conventional funder-dominated definitions and ownership of impact. So when I say that power-conscious piece, they're doing the work internally, thinking about what it means to have this power imbalance in the sector and how funders can really start to shift that. And that comes into play with the definitions, how you're even defining impact and what ownership looks like, who owns the impact. So having some of those deep conversations and explorations, that's one of the things that trust-based funders are really doing when it comes to this side of defining impact. They're also recognizing and centering nonprofits and communities in that whole defining impact, in that whole section of work, and thinking about what it looks like, how you're defining it. So these are just some of the things that we like to lift up that trust-based funders are really doing on that side of things. Then we have the categorizing impact section, and I also want to give the caveat that this is where we're going to be situating a lot of this discussion for today, especially as we dig into the resource. But this is really about understanding the various components of social change, and the components not just that can accelerate social change, but that also can impede impact, including funder actions. We talk about that funder alignment, the values alignment piece, and then how funders can do onerous things, that going back to that initial slide where we talked about some of the conventional ways of operating, and understanding and acknowledging that those conventional ways of operating can actually impede impact. And then also things such as nonprofit organizational health, looking at how you can support nonprofit organization, your grantee partners, and the health of their actual internal organization, to get to greater and stronger impact. And then we go to the evaluating impact side of things, which really looks at a lot of trust-based funders are doing this work where they're shifting from a proving stance to a learning stance, where they're digging in with their grantee partners, with nonprofits, and instead of saying, oh, you have to prove to me you've done X, Y, and Z, you have to prove that this grant has been successful, it's shifting that to how can we learn together? How can we learn collaboratively? Trust-based funders are also evaluating their own funder practice value alignment, making sure that the values that they have are aligned with their actions, are aligned with their practices. And they're really lifting up that mutual accountability piece when it comes to evaluating impact and thinking about the ways that they are accountable as funders to their grantee partners just as much as their grantee partners are accountable to them. They're also shifting from a mindset of attribution. How can we attribute X, Y, and Z to us or to the grantee partners, whatever that looks like? They're shifting that mindset from attribution to contribution. How can we contribute to this social change together? So again, for this conversation, we're going to be primarily sitting in this categorizing impact stage where we're thinking about those various components of social change and how they can accelerate and impede impact. And you'll hear from our speakers these various components and how they've supported the growth and outcomes that they're trying to achieve as well. Shadi?
Thank you. So there, as Shantius is laying out, there are a lot of tentacles when we're talking about impact. And again, today we really want to focus in on how to talk about the impacts that are possible, the categories of impact that we have seen. We have heard from others who have either practiced trust-based philanthropy or been recipients of trust-based philanthropy. We have done series and have produced some resources on how to approach evaluation in a trust-based context. I want to shout out Brenda Solorzano, who really conceptualized this three-pronged framework that we now have available on our website, that we teased out further with the Center for Evaluation Innovation. But it really leans into kind of a reorientation of how to think about learning and evaluation in a trust-based context. And it's very deeply rooted in learning for accountability, doing that self-evaluation, learning to improve decision-making, kind of learning from grantees in the process. What are they learning as they're doing the work? Is the funding supporting nonprofit? Is the approach to funding supporting nonprofits and achieving their self-determined goals? And then taking a longer look at long-term impact, kind of looking at bigger field-wide data over the course of 5 to 10 years to look at, again, that notion of contribution rather than attribution over time. And there's a lot here, and we're really thrilled to have Brenda here who can speak to some of this. But we didn't want to go too far without acknowledging that we've done a lot of work already to explain how to think about evaluation in a different way. But one thing I want to underscore, even though this takes a heavy learning stance, it's not actually counter to or at odds with wanting to see impact. Actually, these things happen together. They happen collectively. So I encourage you to check out the resources we have on this. We've done webinars on this learning and evaluation approach. And Headwaters Foundation has been a tremendous example of this evaluation approach in action. So also encourage you to check out the resources on their website as well.
Thanks, Shadi. So we want to jump into the resource and we'll drop that in the chat for you all. If you haven't had a chance to review it, we wanted to spend some time really lifting up what's come out of this resource, the impact of trust-based philanthropy. I just want to lift up this piece in the corner here in the top corner. When nonprofits and funders collaborate with the shared vision of accountability to the communities they serve and support, it improves outcomes for communities in the social sector at large. And that's the big takeaway out of all of this. But we're going to spend some time going through each of these. And as we're going through them, I want you to be reflective of what you've seen and experienced yourself. And we'll have some space for you to kind of put check marks on the things that you've seen and experienced. And we just want to note also that this resource and all of this has been informed directly by nonprofit organizations and by funders who have directly experienced these impacts. We've derived this data both from anecdotal sources, we hear these things consistently, but then also from qualitative and quantitative data analysis as well. We look at our grant maker survey, our peer exchange, all these different data sources where we're seeing all of the different impacts that come up. And I think that's such a big takeaway for people to get, because oftentimes, as Shadi mentioned before, one of the biggest misperceptions is that we're not concerned with impact. But the reality is there is a whole wealth of impact that's stronger when you make this shift. And so we're kind of going to walk through each of these, and Shadi and I will kind of tag team, and she'll jump in with things as we um, go through all of these different impact levels. And so we'll start with the nonprofit side of things. And as I'm going through this, um, part of our interactive side of things is going to be for you to reflect on what you've seen or experienced personally. So maybe if you are a nonprofit, or if you've had conversations with your grantee partners, or different folks, maybe you've seen some of these things in action, or know this to be true. And I just ask that you hover over the slide and go to the bottom left corner. There should be a little pin for you to annotate. And then if you click on the stamp in the checkbox, you should be able to check off. So we're going to have people kind of check off the thank you. Somebody's showing it in action. So check off the ones that you have seen for yourself. You can copy over other people's check boxes. But yeah, if you can check off the ones that you have seen for yourself as we're walking through this. Yeah, if you can keep them in this column right here as we're walking through so people can still see the text. So we'll go ahead and start with the first one: improved ability to advance mission. So we're seeing nonprofit partners who have more time and capacity to really focus on their mission rather than their funder obligations. Maybe if funders are shifting to this trust-based approach, they're reducing the amounts of requirements. And so nonprofits have more time and focus to be able to look at their mission. We're also seeing greater flexibility for nonprofits to respond to community needs. So they're able to, rather than focusing on the funder requirements, they are really leaning into community needs. And we're also seeing increased strategic capacity to plan for the long term, especially with multi-year, the general operating funds. There's a greater focus on that strategic capacity to really plan for long term. So these are a lot of the things we're seeing nonprofits really experiencing. And I'm seeing there's a lot of resonance there with that. Thank you for those of you who are engaging with this. We're also seeing a strengthened sense of innovation and experimentation in nonprofits. Nonprofits are reporting increased financial and moral support to really dream big and take risks, especially when you couple the financial support that we talk about with trust-based philanthropy, the multi-year general operating support. When you couple that with this relational approach where, we're really decreasing the stigma and stress that's, regarding failure, as you see in that second point, you're seeing more of these things around strengthened experimentation, strengthened confidence in nonprofits to be able to dream bigger, to be able to take more risks without the fear of funding being pulled. We're also seeing increased capacity to learn and to iterate, especially when funders are leading by example and doing that work themselves. And then we're seeing improved organizational health. We're seeing consistent reports of reduced stress for nonprofit leaders. We're seeing more support and resources for people-centered wellness, whether that's, the sabbatical grants, the wellness grants, even just the priorities when funders are checking in with their grantee partners, checking in and saying, how are you doing? How's your staff doing? Having those conversations and really centering and focusing on wellness. So we're seeing that in action. And then that increased ability to retain and grow staff, both because of the wellness and holistic support, and then also because of the ability to plan long term. So these are just some of the impacts that we're seeing from nonprofit partners. And as I'm seeing from the check boxes, a lot of you all are seeing and experiencing that as well. Shadi, did you want to jump in with
Yeah,
any?
well, first of all, thanks for giving us like a course in how to use the interactive features on Zoom. I'm loving this. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add here is that, you know, of course, I think a lot of people who have some awareness of trust-based philanthropy are aware that it has a lot to do with reducing burdens on nonprofits. That's not the only factor, but a lot of those are seen here. But you see, it's also not about just reducing burdens for the sake of reducing burdens or just to be nice. It's actually about helping organizations have the focus, the time, the space, the stability, the staff in order to do their mission critical work. And so these outcomes really kind of are our best example of how to actually break down those impacts as concrete things that we are actually seeing are possible as a result of this approach. So thanks for laying that out so well, Shantias.
Thank you. So we'll jump into the next one, and I'm going to see if we can clear everything so we can do it again. With the impact on funders. Um, so again, if you can click on that annotate, there's the stamp feature. If you go up the checkbox, there's a stamp feature and you can click on the check mark and check off which ones you've seen for yourself or know to be true when it comes to the impact on funders. We're seeing strengthened strategic capacity. Funders are seeing more authentic understandings of the barriers and accelerators to social impact because they're leaning in and having those conversations, and they're taking away some of that fear and mistrust that we see in conventional philanthropy. So they're getting real, honest understandings of the authentic barriers and accelerators to social impact in a deeper way than conventional philanthropy. Um, we're also seeing an increased ability to recognize and address resource gaps in funding areas because, again, of this transparency of this deeper relationship that we're seeing. We're also seeing funders reporting healthier organizational culture internally. They're looking at how they're aligning their organizational values to their practices. And so there's a healthier culture internally. I know we've all maybe seen or experienced or heard about toxic work environments. And a lot of these trust-based funders are really digging in and thinking about how to make sure their organizations are healthier, their organizational cultures are healthier. Um, we're also seeing that greater honesty and transparency internally and externally. We're seeing funders, trust-based funders that are really leaning in and being more open about some of their hurdles, some of their issues, some of their strengths, and learning together. We're also seeing, this is one of my favorite things to hear about, that increased joy, engagement, and job satisfaction, both for staff and board. We're hearing funders talking about how joyful it is to be in partnership with grantee partners rather than so focused on compliance. It's a true relational approach, and board members and staff members are reporting more job satisfaction because of this. And we're seeing increased awareness and self-reflection and accountability from funders as they're realizing some of the conventional things they've been doing have been harmful or maybe haven't had the intentions that they wanted in that moment. So we're seeing that all play into this healthier organizational culture. And we're also seeing improved relationships and reputations, both with grantee partners and internally, of course. We're seeing greater alignment between between funder values and practices. And we're seeing improved abilities to understand and respond to the needs of nonprofits and communities, especially with this, flexible, more responsive funding. And a deeper sense of accountability to the nonprofits and to communities, especially when we're digging into to building those relationships there. So I see a lot of, of things resonating with folks, a lot of things that people have seen as well. Thank you for digging in there and reflecting on that with the check marks. Shadi, did you want to jump in with anything?
Yeah, thank you. I think the headline here is that trust-based philanthropy, again, it yields a number of impacts that are beyond just what it benefits for nonprofits. Obviously, that's a really important area of focus, but there's a lot to gain from the funder side when practicing in this way. Also, what you see here in these outcomes is that this is not just about the grant-making relationship between the funder and the nonprofit. Of course, there's strengthened relationships that happen there in that relationship. However, when trust-based philanthropy is embraced as a holistic approach, across the four dimensions of an organization's work, not just grant-making practice, but also culture, structures, and leadership. It can really contribute to some of these deeper impacts that can have long-lasting benefits for a staff, for a team, for the strategic capacity of a foundation. And this is really one of the things that often gets missed in some of these misperceptions or kind of flyover reviews of trust-based philanthropy. It is really oriented towards strengthening that strategic capacity, leaning on relationships and learning in order to do that. So I'm excited to hear some of the stories that we'll share, both from our speakers and also from those of you who are here who have also clearly seen a lot of these outcomes in your work in trust-based philanthropy.
Thank you. Oh. All right. And then let me clear. So now we'll go into the impact on communities again with the check marks. If you go to that annotate and then go up to the stamp feature, the check marks, you can kind of check off the ones that you've seen, experienced, or know to be true for yourself. So we'll jump in with improved access and opportunities for communities. And when we talk about communities, we talk about the people, the populations that are directly affected by the funding that we're giving, the people that are closest to the issues, the social issues that we're trying to address. So we're seeing community needs being met in greater scale and quality, or we're seeing that being reported. Um, that when we're shifting our practices and our funding, we're being more responsive, we're being in greater relationship. Communities are getting their needs met in a greater scale and quality, especially with the multi-year general operating support, especially with support beyond the check, all these different things. We're also seeing an increased amount of opportunities for community-informed solutions. And that's whether we're bringing communities into the decision making, into the process, or just having community voice at the center. We're seeing community perspectives being lifted up. We're seeing an increased integration of community feedback into nonprofit-led efforts. We're seeing community focus groups and boards and volunteer boards and different things like that, where communities are integrated into the feedback of the work that's being done. We're also seeing reduced disparities in access and opportunities because of the ways that we're engaging and we're able to report back and hear back about how communities are impacted by this funding. We're also seeing this increased engagement, empowerment, and collaboration from community members. So this includes increased opportunities to provide input and collaborate on social sector work. As I mentioned, a lot of these participatory frameworks and ways that funders are really bringing in community members. We're seeing improved relationships with we're seeing communities have improved relationships with nonprofits and funders because now they're mindful of the ways they're engaging. They're mindful of this mutual accountability. They're mindful of a lot of these things, and they're intentional about building these relationships and prioritizing that. And we're seeing communities having a heightened sense of trust in the social sector, more so than before, which is a great thing to realize. And I'm seeing a lot of resonance there as well with the check marks. Thank you for participating in that. Shadi, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, one thing I will say is that to see these kinds of impacts on communities really requires not just one foundation practicing trust-based philanthropy in a community. So these impacts and outcomes are become more possible when more funders embrace this. So we're beginning to see evidence of this, but also just to be clear, this is not the impact that, if it's just one foundation that's doing it, especially if it's at a smaller grant making scale, we need more funders practicing trust-based philanthropy in order to see more of this type of impact. And that's, we're seeing this evidence, but this to me, in a lot of ways, is also kind of aspirational because it requires a more, collective commitment. And I know there are efforts in regions or in issue areas to try to, work as collectives of funders, but this really also relies on funders and foundations working together with this shared commitment and shared accountability to communities. So there's room to grow here is what I'm saying, and let's challenge ourselves to explore ways to lean into this more.
And then at the bottom of the resource, we have this big picture social impact, which we wanted to lift up we think about um, as we think about the holistic picture of social impact. When we have stronger, healthier, more collaborative, more democratic social sector and society, we're thinking about the ways that we're shifting and leaning into this work. Shadi, did you want to speak to this at all?
I want to lift up a point that Michelle just made in the chat. Even if this kind of collective work toward supporting, better outcomes for communities is aspirational, this is how systems change happens. Thank you for lifting that up, Michelle. That's so right. And that's why we see a lot of these collective outcomes will lead to the bigger picture social change that many of us are working toward. And so there's like a bigger vision that trust-based philanthropy can contribute to if we can all collectively commit to the strategic and rigorous work that it requires. And we're beginning to see some evidence of it. We have a lot of great examples of systems change in communities as a result of trust-based investment. So it's really, really exciting. And this is the time, this is the time for us to really fully commit to this. So thank you. Thanks for giving me a chance to weigh in, and thanks for laying it out so well, Shantias.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, this is the full resource again. Hopefully you continue to dig into this, share this. We're already hearing funders that are sharing this with their boards, with their staff members that are using it as a jumping off point, I guess, to really think about what evaluation looks like for them, how they're leaning in, how they can tell the story, how they can make the case. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and transition to the next part of our conversation. I'm so excited to hear from two amazing trust-based advocates and leaders in the sector. We're going to hear from Brenda Solorzano, the CEO of Headwaters Foundation. And then afterwards, we're going to hear from Yolanda Sointro, the president and CEO at the Institute for Nonprofit Practice. And they're just going to share some open reflections, both from the resource, from what they've seen, and their experiencing and how they're thinking about impact and TVP and all of the things. So Brenda, I will pass it over to you to start with some of your reflections.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I am a Latina woman with short brown hair, wearing a pink sweater blouse with a San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge background, and I am coming to you from the land of the Salish Kootenai people, which is Missoula, Montana. I want to start a little with taking a step back and asking everybody to think about, like, why are we asking the question around impact? Is it because we are trying to address the needs of the donor? Is it because we are trying to help social change happen? Is it because we want to help our grantees achieve their missions? And the reason I want to start there is that I think there's been so much focus on we want to know impact to make our funders happy or the donor happy, again, that donor-centric model, as opposed to really having a paradigm shift on why are we doing evaluation? So I want to start there because that for me is sort of a fundamental question that I think any foundation needs to begin with. The second thing that I want to talk about is asking, how do you shift from a culture of evaluation for accountability to a culture of evaluation for learning, right? Like, that's the second piece. There's been so much accountability and compliance focused in this work traditionally, and not enough on learning. I often tell the story of I've been a program officer, a program director, a chief program director. I've had an opportunity to fund thousands of organizations. I've gotten thousands of grantee reports. I've read about 5 of them, really, if I'm being honest. And what have I done with them? Versus really shifting that and saying, how do we think about this work being about learning so that we can be more strategic in the decisions that we get to make as funders in terms of the assets that we control and the investments that we make in community groups. And then the other piece that I just want to throw out there for everybody to think about is, I think we make everything so complex in philanthropy. Instead of saying, how do we take a common sense approach to understanding what's happening as a result of the work that organizations are doing out there in community? And what is a more easier common sense approach to be able to understand that? Instead of, we're going to have the study, and we're going to have this data, and we got to have ROI, we're going to have all these different bureaucracies that we have created evaluation and learning. So I'm starting with those questions because with those comments, because in your questions, there was a lot of like, how do I start this conversation with my board? How do I change the practice at my foundation? And I think these are some beginning questions that you can explore within your organization to try to shift your thinking or your organization's thinking around how do you move from a traditional conventional approach into a trust-based approach to evaluation and learning. I love the framework that the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project has put together in terms of the nonprofit funder and the community impact. And I can tell you that there are lots of stories that we at Headwaters have seen that I'll share with you in each of these different categories. So on the nonprofit impact side, we have so frequently heard from our grantee partners that the way we do our work with them through a trust-based approach, a full trust-based approach, allows them to focus on mission-critical work. And they often reach out to us. We're not even reaching out to them. They are now reaching out to us and saying, hey, I have this problem or this challenge. Can you help me? Hey, I need to talk through this particular challenge and issue that I have in my work. And so the shift has been from, we're the overseers, we're the compliance managers, to we are partners that are trying to understand how we can be more helpful. And they are recognizing that and reaching out to us in many, many ways, far more than we thought. We give grantees the option to have a conversation with us or not have a conversation. And 90% of our grantees say they want to have a conversation with us because they find value add in that conversation. It's a mutual relationship building conversation, but also more importantly, a learning conversation. On the funder impact side, I often kid with my team at Headwaters that good luck going to go find a job at another foundation that gives you as much job satisfaction as Headwaters. Now, the reason I say that is that our team is not stuck in their offices doing your traditional things that program officers do, right? They're not reviewing LOIs, RFPs. They're not, sitting on piles of reports. They're not putting dockets together. They're out in the community, building relationships, being more than just a check writer to communities and organizations. And so there's a, Shadi was saying, there's a huge satisfaction in that kind of job versus a compliance kind of job. And when we do a Great Place to Work survey of our staff, our results are staggering in terms of what our staff says in terms of their satisfaction of doing the work in the way that we do it in a trust-based way at Headwaters. The other thing that I want to pull out is it had also built the relationship between staff and our board. So just as we are trying to break the power dynamic between the foundation and grantees, we're also trying to break the power dynamic between trustees and staff. And because we're breaking down that power dynamic, we're trying to build authentic, clear relationships between board and staff. Now there is alignment, and it feels like we are working together as opposed to us versus them. That sometimes tends to happen in philanthropy. And then impact on communities. I'll share a couple of different stories. One is just recently I was talking to an organization that we funded, and she mentioned to me that the way that we are doing work has modeled for her in her leadership at this nonprofit how to do collaborative relationship trust building activities that has improved their ability to do the work in communities and has improved their ability to be able to be in relationship and problem solving on the work that they're doing. The other example I'll tell you is we had a grantee that recently sent us an email talking about how working with us had really shifted her paradigm in terms of how she works with people with lived experience, because she recognized that just like the foundation had a power dynamic over nonprofits, nonprofits sometimes have power dynamics over people with lived experience. And so she's beginning to sort of take some of the lessons that she's learned from the way that we work with her and bringing them down into how she is working with people with lived experience. So all that is sort of, a couple of stories to emphasize some of the things that Shantias and Shadi shared. The other question that was posed to us is, what do we hope would change or shift in this field in terms of how we think about impact? And from my perspective, I wish the field would have a complete paradigm shift around the work of impact evaluation and learning, and to really sort of think about why, start going back to the question I said, why we're trying to understand impact, who gets to define that, right? For us, it's been our grantees that created our theory of change, and empowered communities and our grantees to be in that power role, and to really think differently about what is evidence of impact, right? We have always relied in our field on data and the written word and graphs and charts and all these things that are quantifiable, versus if you look at non-Western traditions and cultures that have passed on information over centuries and centuries of time, it's been a narrative storytelling approach. And so how do we, again, think outside the box and look differently about what qualifies as data, what is important for us to be looking at, and how can we be more innovative and creative in the way we work. Just some brief thoughts for you guys to think about. I really am excited about the potential to dialogue. Happy to answer any questions. Encourage you to go on the Headwaters website. We have our learning book. That's a whole other thing that I could spend an hour talking about, but I won't bore you with those details. But it is available on our website for anybody that's interested in learning more.
Wow, thank you so much, Brenda. It's always so wonderful to hear your insights, and I know we'll hear a little bit more from you as we open up the discussion. So I hope you all are kind of teeing up your questions for her. I know we're seeing some in the chat, and we'll get to more afterwards, but I definitely want to introduce Yolanda and invite her to the main stage to provide some valuable insights, especially from that nonprofit perspective. Thank you so much for being here with us, Yolanda.
Oh, my pleasure and my honor. Thanks for having me. It's really good to be with you all. I am Yolanda Quentro, President and CEO of the Institute for Nonprofit Practice. I am calling from Wampanoag Lands in Massachusetts. and have brown hair, olive skin, wearing glasses, and also a bright green sweater over a black shirt. Um, I am delighted to actually have the opportunity wherever I can to talk about the impact of trust-based philanthropy directly on nonprofits. We serve thousands of nonprofits around the country, and so we have a lens at the Institute around ways in which the funder and grantee relationship can advance work and also really hinder our collective progress in communities. And I certainly can kind of share a couple examples and in the Q&A speak a little bit more about ways in which we practically see trust-based philanthropy impact the work on the ground. And so just generally speaking, in thinking about how these shifts over time and as they've been evolving with trust-based philanthropy, with more funders practicing it, have impacted nonprofits. And specifically, I can even speak to our own. Shantias and Brenda have already talked about, so did Shadi, a number of ways in which these impacts are really significant in the operations of a nonprofit, right? So reducing grantee work burden at a time where staff loss is at an all-time high, where hiring staff and the ramp for hiring staff is taking much longer. We have a different set of organizations and companies we're now competing with for talent for various reasons we can get into. And so the opportunity to actually reduce workload has real business and impact implications. And so I just want to kind of highlight that these are real costs. And so the value of that dollar actually is leverageable and leveraged in a different way than it might be if it was very restricted, where in some ways it almost becomes worth less. So if you care about the investment of that dollar, think about general operating funding and working in this framework as a way to actually get more for your money. Funders, as we know, are also looking to figure out what your impact is, right? And part of what happens for nonprofits in a lack of transparency is that they fear losing funding. As many of you know, I'm preaching to the choir. But then what that does is it restricts the possibility for solutions for real problems. And I think right now, in a time where the context is evolving so much, and we're having to respond in new and innovative ways all the time to a changing political context, economic context, and certainly, not too long ago, even though I know it in some ways feels like a blur, to a context of a real global health crisis. We need to be able to not be afraid to tell funders, this is where we are, we have to pivot, we can't lose your resources, our communities will suffer. And ultimately, if we know where you're funding organizations because you believe in their mission, you've seen that they have impact, they want to have impact, and your strategies are aligned, then the nuances around very specific goals and objectives that we often get all kind of we tie ourselves up in knots around, become almost trivial in the big picture, right? When we're talking in the chat about systems change or even just mission alignment and community change, we have to be responsive to community needs in ways that are aligned with both of our missions. And I think unrestricted capital does that. We've done some research also on not only the retention issues that are brewing. We commissioned a large-scale kind of study of all of the research that's out there around well-being and burnout in the sector. And so it just felt like it might be important to also talk about how trust-based philanthropy is offering funders who are actually practicing this way are offering nonprofits opportunity to address this very urgent crisis that's impacting their organizations. And so, some of those practices look like their ability to actually pivot money into, we talked about, I think Shantias, you mentioned sabbaticals and other initiatives like that, real benefits, increased salary. As many of you probably know, salaries have skyrocketed. So if we can't actually rework the funding we have when funding is also increasingly more challenging to get, we can't keep our staff. And so, we also are looking at how we invest in well-being initiatives and support nonprofits in learning those practices, not because of the moral imperative alone, and not to make it sound like well-being and wellness is let's go fund a bunch of yoga classes for staff, but actually a recognition that the well-being and wellness of the workforce that is supporting the well-being and wellness of our communities is a business imperative. It's more than a moral imperative. And we used to talk about this when it was everybody way back in the day, was talking about why do you invest in DEI? And now we have other issues relative to DEI, right? But we used to say there's a bottom line impact to this. And there's one around well-being and flexibility of funding to be able to innovate and deal with issues that are really new in this context, and that nonprofits are facing fast and furiously. So I'll just give an example. Just before our fiscal year is from July 1 to June 30th. Last June, the SCOTUS decision around affirmative action came out. We had several applications and funding at play. We expected, because we were invited for these applications, to receive almost $2 million that we didn't get in the first 2 quarters because of the chilling effect of SCOTUS. And just to put it in perspective, we have an $8 million budget. So $2 million that we were expecting didn't come in. And now we're leadership development and capacity building with an equity lens. We're not only racial equity work or only gender equity work or only working on women's health issues or only working with LGBTQ populations. So imagine how these decisions have affected these organizations that have like a laser focus, if that's how it might have affected INP. And so what I can say is, because of our relationship through these practices evolving with some of our key funders, I was able to be honest and say, this is how this ruling has impacted us. We're going to have to make cuts. I'm not sure what our growth trajectory that I promised you is going to look like. I need to actually think about how I'm going to pivot some funding to retain the staff and take care of them because they're carrying a lot on their shoulders and people are leaving. Going into consulting, corporate philanthropy, all sorts of things, right? Everything that a nonprofit can't afford the salary of. Folks are attracted to that for good reason, and I don't blame them. And so I was able to say that, and funders showed up. Those funders made some introductions. One funder in particular took this issue to their board, and I don't expect this of everybody who practices trust-based philanthropy, but took the issue that we were facing to the board and actually secured an additional $300,000 for us to help us weather this storm. So we made cuts, we've made adjustments. Some people stepped up. Obviously, a number of people stepped back. But I could only really say that, I'm saying this now in a room of 100 funders, but I could only really say that to the funders who I trusted first, because I was afraid of what might this do to cannibalize the rest of the funding that we had. And I'm pretty confident around my relationships with funders, and I know the leaders that we train and serve, especially those of smaller nonprofits or those who are new EDs who don't have the same opportunities. So that's just one example. If we can be a little less afraid of failure, we can innovate and learn without failure. We can collectively work on how to measure success in ways that then together we can figure out how to resource those measures and make sure that they're not kind of immersed in dynamics that are toxic around power. And so I'm really optimistic that as this movement takes on, there's a lot more opportunity for us to have the kind of impact that we're seeing. And, I think I'll kind of wrap there and happy to jump in with other examples and questions. But when we were asked to think about, what our hope is for how the social sector will shift when thinking about impact, I really thought about where are we shifting from? Our impact originally was just what everybody wanted, and we made it work. And if we actually dismantled that entirely and said, well, what do we need in order to reach the end goal of this mission in this organization, in this community? That changes over time, but the needle can keep moving in that direction. And so we kind of fool ourselves into thinking that we were all measuring impact perfectly before. We weren't. We were just kind of making up stories, not to minimize it. But, we measured outputs and some outcomes, but were we moving the needle on progress in our communities and towards our missions? I mean, maybe just as much as we are now. So what are we afraid of? And I would say that's the task at hand for us to figure out how to make the case for something better than before and this. And we have this framework to help us do that.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Yolanda, for those beautiful reflections, for your transparency. The power dynamic is not lost on us. And it's really refreshing to hear how that played out for you and how you can be transparent and be a great advocate for this work. And how trust-based funders are showing up in that way to support nonprofits. So thank you so much for your perspective, for sharing that nonprofit lens. Um, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So we do want to open it up. We have both of our speakers on the line. We want to open it up both for reflections. And Danielle, if you can take me off the spotlight, because we'll all be talking. But yeah, if you want to ask questions of Yolanda or Brenda, if you want to react to the framework, if you want to share stories that you're thinking you're thinking of that are resonating for you, maybe you want to problem solve, maybe you have an issue with this and need some support there. This is open space. We wanted to have space for the community, because I know we're thinking about a lot of different things when it comes to impact. And so I know we have some stuff happening in the chat, but you're also welcome to raise your hand and to speak out if you would like. And I see in the chat, I'll just read this off. Caitlin, if you want to open up and share, you can. Let me see.
Thanks. I'm sorry, it was kind of a long-winded question, but this is just based on my own experience as a former nonprofit ED. And I don't know if we ever got money, in it from a truly trust-based model, honestly. But I'm still curious, if for a, say, mid-sized nonprofit that's got an engaged board, I'm very curious about the concept of partnership with a funder and what that looks like. And just having had experience with a funder that I think thought they were engaged in trust-based philanthropy, but, sort of their partnership was sort of engaging in skepticism about some of the things we were doing. And I don't think you're ready for these funds yet because you're undergoing these transitions. And so the power, I still acutely felt this power imbalance because ultimately this funder had funds and could decide whether or not to give. And we had to sort of be aware of that power and how we communicated with that funder. Thank you.
Go ahead, Brenda. I see you.
Yeah, I'll jump on this. I mean, I think we can never get rid of the power dynamic, so I think we have to just understand that. I think what we can do is lessen it. So that's just the first thing that all of us who work in philanthropy, even trust-based funders, have to be okay with. The second piece is for our work, it's been we are engaging with our grantees we wait for our grantees to reach out and say, we want to engage with you. And so when they come to us, then we engage, right? And the reason that they reach out to us and say we want to engage is that their entire experience with us has not been about the check, has not been about applying, has not been about meeting certain expectations. It's been, yeah, we have money, we're going to give you money because you're mission aligned and you've been doing this work and you know better what you need to do with that, so go. And when you start building that kind of authentic, trusting relationship, the dynamic breaks a little bit. And I have been part of foundations that, you know, we center community, or we like to talk about how we're partners or we're a resource to our grantees, when in reality, what you described, Caitlin, was probably more likely to what was happening. Versus at Headwaters, is not initiated by the foundation and not driven by the foundation. It's following the lead of the grantee and what the grantee needs and how we can be a resource to them and their work. And it doesn't happen immediately. You know, we've been doing this work for 4 or 5 years, and I think now our grantees really trust us, and so the relationship is different. At the beginning, people were still like, yeah, we've heard this before. We've heard funders wanting to center community or share power or whatever. And so we're still going to treat you the way we treat most foundations, which is like, we tell you what you think you want to know, or what we think you want to hear, so that we don't put our grant in jeopardy. And so the first few years there was that. And I would say now there's a lot more transparency of, here's this problem I have. Here's this challenge I'm dealing with. Here's this a thing that maybe you could help me with, or, you know, I need you to do this for us, you know, whether it's write a letter of support or, you know, make a connection to a funder. And so I think that's sort of an important thing to really not see yourself as imposing yourself, but rather.
Yeah, I could chime in just like quickly as on the grantee side, as you've experienced personally. I would say where I've experienced it, so there are funders who will say that they practice trust-based philanthropy, who I'm like, that doesn't look like trust-based philanthropy. And I know a good amount about what these practices should look like. And then there are others who I think, in addition to some of the practical things that they do to change how they give money, how they deal with reporting, ways in which they create platforms for leaders, those kinds of things. In addition to that, I think at the fundamental level, what they do is communicate. And communicating also what you can't do, to me, is just as powerful as saying, we could do this whole thing in trust-based philanthropy. And so I feel like with some funders who are like, you know what, our strategy is this. Like, we can't just give out general operating money, but we're going to actually work with this framework within the strategy that we fund to create as much flexibility for you as possible. And they're honest about where their barriers are with their own, you know, the people above them, if they're program officers or their board. And that elicits a lot of trust. And so then I can say where my challenges might be, or are the leaders that we serve could be a little bit more open about where they are. And so to me, that's a cue. Like, are we communicating? Is there transparency? Even if you can't totally get there, what's it look like for you and what's in the way? And I know what's in the way. That in and of itself allows me to be really honest about where the challenges are to meeting, you know, maybe the goals that we set forth at the beginning of a relationship.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely love that. And we acknowledge that, you know, it will take grantee partners time to navigate that, especially with, you know, a lot of funders not having shifted, and, you know, the trust takes time, and understanding who to kind of code switch with, so to speak, that takes time as well. So grantee partners are navigating this as much as funders are. So yeah. Wendy, I see your hand up. You can go ahead.
Hi, thanks everybody for being so engaging on this webinar. I'm wondering, and this is for everybody, but maybe particularly for Trust-Based Philanthropy Project folks, if there's some kind of intersection or tool that you're thinking about with the grantee perception report, because years and years ago, when Brenda and I worked together, we used the Center for Effective Philanthropy's grantee perception report, and I just love, I mean, this was a long time ago, right? I just love that they've continued doing all this research and really validate what trust-based philanthropy is about in terms of talking about this relationship and the dynamic. And I'm working with, so now I'm a consultant, I've been working with a client, and we've used the self-assessment tool that you have on your website, which we love. But I also feel like who really needs to answer these questions to really understand whether or not there's trusting relationships, or something to the tune of the grantee perception report. And so I'm just wondering if there's a resource that already exists that I don't know about aside from that, or if you're thinking about integrating that kind of a tool into the tools that you have.
I can't answer for the project, but I just want to raise, Wendy, that we have actually done the grantee perception report at Headwaters. And in every category, we scored in the 92nd percentile or higher. I've been doing the grantee perception report at a number of different. That never happens. You have some high marks and some low marks, mostly low marks, a lot of room for improvement. Because it's a comparative, study, it is a helpful tool, because generally people just give foundations positive feedback, but with a comparative tool, you can assess. And I think that there's something there, right? Like for a foundation, and I'm not sharing this because I want to pat myself on the back, but we had like a 90% response rate to begin with, our grantees, and for our grantees to rate us that high, I think there's something there, right? That if we can get more foundations who are trust-based to do the grantee perception report, so that we have a data set that we can then say, this is what nonprofits are saying about funders that operate in trust-based ways. I think it would be really interesting. I do know that the team has talked with the Center for Effective Philanthropy and trying to include or add some questions around trust-based philanthropy. So I know that has happened. But I know that a lot of us, it's a pretty hefty price tag to pay to do the grantee perception report. And that keeps a lot of foundations, especially the smaller foundations, from being able to do that.
Yeah, oh, Shadi, were you I know you have more context than than I do about any relationship with CEP, but I will just say that yeah, we definitely lift that up, and we have trust-based funders that are doing the grantee perception report. And that's one of the things. We also have funders who are just offering getting feedback in other ways. We have a variety of ways. We have a variety of partners that funders have really leaned into, feedback labs, the Fund for Shared Insight. They all have different tools and frameworks and resources. Even on our resources page, TBP in Action, we have examples of funders that have used different tools to get feedback, to get that grantee perspective. So we lift up, there are a variety of ways that you can do it. We do acknowledge the hefty price tag, and also the hefty time commitment. And maybe not every grantee has that. Maybe not every funder has that. And so we've been lifting up a variety of different ways that funders can still make sure they're centering grantee feedback. And that's the TBP approach is, however you do it, there are a lot of really great ways to do it, but however you do it, as long as it gets done and it gets done in a way that's not, super onerous to your grantee partner, but that you can get some of that feedback and some of that perspective and make sure that's centered. And that's kind of how we've been doing that. I'm not sure, Shadi, if you want to add anything to that. I hope that's hopeful. Anybody else want to chime in? I see some things in the chat.
I know that when folks registered, there were a lot of good questions that people raised that we didn't necessarily get to. So if you're still sitting with a question that you feel like was unanswered in our discussion, or that you want to dig into, that maybe we brushed across, and you want to get into a little bit more deeply, this is a great time to do that.
Mhm. And I'll lift up one of them. I have them open. Y'all asked some really great questions. And so I'll just toss these out and see if, either the speakers or anybody wants to answer any of them. One that really stuck with me is how this is strategic. And I know we talk a lot, we throw around the strategic word, we talk a lot about it. And we've kind of tried to lift up how this is rigorous, how this approach, we're not calling for you to just throw everything out the window. But I'm curious if anybody else wants to lean into the strategy behind this, how they've really thought about this as a strategic, rigorous approach, particularly when it comes to impact.
Shantias, one of the things that I often say is it's important for a foundation, from my perspective, to be strategic in what it wants to be a part of in this world in order to be an effective trust-based foundation. And that's where the strategy comes in for me. So for example, at Headwaters, we are very clear. We have a theory of change. We know what we're trying to fund. We know what are the organizations in the communities we work in that are mission aligned. And then therefore it's easy to find them and fund them and give them general operating support and support them and build a relationship with them. And so our theory of change and everything that we've defined as what success is has come from our grantees. Like, they built our theory of change, they've built our outcomes, they've built how they want to report into the foundation. So I feel like Headwaters has a strategy. We're driving, we're being strategic, we're making choices to drive those outcomes that our grantees have defined. But we've done the work, right, to figure out, to make sure that we're reflecting what our grantees and the communities we're working with want to see change in their communities and improve. So that's a little bit of a different take on sort of your traditional approach to strategic philanthropy, right? Where the foundation comes up with the strategy, or an expert comes up with the strategy and then drives it and implements it or forces it upon communities. Again, it's a paradigm shift of like, who gets to decide why and what is it that success looks like? Who gets to decide that? And I think foundations that do that upfront work in partnership with their grantees and in the communities they work with are going to have an easier time in developing ways to think about what's changing, what's shifting, and you're doing it in partnership with your grantees. So then you move from an accountability lens to a learning lens. And our grantees want to learn from other folks that are doing like work in different parts of Montana. And so it's now shifted the paradigm again for them of we're not reporting back to the foundation because we have to tell them what we did with their money. We're sharing back with the foundation because we want to share with other colleagues and we want to learn from other colleagues. And I think that all has made us far more strategic. We have real-time information coming in all the time about what's working and not working. And we use that information to tee up conversations with our staff and with our board about how do we allocate the resources going forward. So every year, what we spend and how we spend in terms of our grant making comes directly from that learning that we've been doing in partnership with our grantees. And we've shifted programs, we've shifted resources and approaches based on that work. I would argue that all of that is being strategic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely echo the point Shadi put in the chat. Yeah, this really just demonstrates that this all speaks to that collaborative culture among organizations and communities, and all of that is strategic. I think we really, when people think about this on a base level, they think, oh, this just means we're throwing everything out, but what we're really encouraging is this really thoughtful analysis of how to build stronger relationships for greater impact, and that's very strategic. So yeah, thank you so much for that example. Anybody else want to share any thoughts? I know we have a few more minutes left. Or any reflections or any questions? I know this can be heady things, so it's some heady stuff happening. So if there are still things that you're lingering with, that you're still wanting to explore, you're saying this is great, but how do I actually start, or how do I actually do this? We can take, I think, maybe one or two more questions. So I'll throw out one more from the registration. And it's one I really appreciate. The question is, how do we ensure that at the end of the day, communities are better off through our collective efforts? I know we've talked about, the grantee feedback mechanisms and things like that to understand the relationship between grantees and funders. But I like the focus on communities, and that's something I think sometimes we overlook. So is anything coming up for folks as we think about how to ensure that communities are better off because of our collective efforts, especially as we think about impact?
I guess I just want to underscore the question that Brenda opened up with, and inviting curiosity within organizations. What are we measuring impact for? what are we trying to measure for? And I think it is a good opportunity to remind that really at the end of the day, the accountability should be to communities. And and in a lot of the conventional structures, that's not even really kind of part of the conversation. So I think reminding that, bringing that back in the conversation is a key way. It does require fundamental cultural shift from what has been predominantly very donor-centric, very focused on proving the impact of dollars versus learning about what communities need to thrive. But I think a lot of that can happen by just asking the right questions, as Brenda pointed out, and shifting and really kind of reminding and bringing it back to what the mission is all about. That's just my thoughts. I'm sure our speakers will have more to offer.
For me, Shadi, the thing that came up is a while back we engaged with Listen for Good, and we started on this was literally like a decade ago when they first started, but we started on the path of feedback loops, and we started to bring voice from the community to the funder and vice versa, and actually connecting funders to the community that we serve. And I see a lot of our nonprofit leaders doing that more and more. The challenge is these are like qualitative data points and not quantitative ones. And so what we need to do, I think, collectively is think about, so how do we actually take the data from the community and the stories and the impact narratives and move towards some balance of qualitative and quantitative data, knowing that those need to be resourced. So they're expensive to resource, measure, and even come up with. And that's where nonprofits really need their funder partners behind them to think about how to do that work. If together we both need that information, can we actually resource it together differently to get there? So
And building off of that, I think it would be interesting for funders to come together and figure out what's a common set of quantitative metrics that we could all be looking at and be collecting once, as opposed to, 1,000 foundations, 1,000 different ways to collect information, and we're all looking at it differently, and the nonprofits have to shoulder the burden of providing all that data. And then also thinking creatively about what data sets already exist, right, in the world. And how can foundations shift from collecting data from grantees to looking at existing publicly available data sources? And can we put those into a place where, again, collectively funders could use and not have to recreate the wheel and all the burdens that come with that.
Yeah, wow, I love that. Definitely some really great points there. And I know we are at time. So I just want to send really deep gratitude both to Brenda and Yolanda for your participation, for your insights, your amazing thoughts here. Please, if you have not filled out that evaluation, that's helpful for us as we continue these conversations. We know there's still a lot of questions and a lot of things we want to explore around what impact and evaluation looks like in a trust-based way. And so this is just I don't want to say the beginning because there's already been thinking on it, but this is the middle. There's more to come. So we'll continue talking about this. Please continue lifting up questions or thoughts or things that are coming up or things you may need from us to continue making the case and navigating this. So thank you all so much for your participation, and we'll talk soon. Take care.